All right, welcome to another episode of Forward Thinking Leaders. We're your hosts, Mike and Mike. Let's get into it.
You're alive in us. We're alive in you.
Again, that music is by Benjamin J. Jones. That's Benjamin J. Jones. You can look him up on Spotify, Apple Music, or whatever. Good friend of ours, podcast contributor, and obviously recording artist and writer and everything. So I'm here today. Ben's not here today, though. I'm here today with Mike. What's going on?
How's everybody doing? Just super excited to be here.
Yeah, this is our third time recording now.
Yeah, super nice. I really like doing this.
Yeah, we're getting into it, aren't we?
Absolutely.
So today's episode is titled Eustress is Good Stress. That's E-U-S-T-R-E-S-S. Eustress is good stress. And we're going to talk a little bit this time and next time about the difference between eustress, which is the good kind of stress that propels us to improve, to get better, to grow, to learn, etc. The difference between that and distress. On the next episode, we're going to talk about distress. But today is about eustress. So I thought I'd share kind of a light story, and then we'll get into it and see what you have to say. But
All right.
one thing for me that was super stressful about a year and a half ago. So I was a missionary in the Philippines for 14 years. So I got pretty good at like missionary type things. But one thing I didn't do a whole lot of was preaching, because I would do a lot of other stuff, feeding programs and outreaches.
Mm-hmm.
I led worship a lot. I would do that. And I would share like at evangelistic events. But the message there is usually pretty straightforward, right? Except
right.
Jesus. It's talking about Jesus and salvation and giving your life and surrendering to him. And then you move on to the next place, and the local church, which is now where we are,
right?
What we're talking about now, right? They're the ones who kind of carry on from there. So when I came here and started pastoring, the pressure of preaching every week was tough. And I was blessed to come into a situation where there were a lot of people here, as you know, who preach or teach. So I didn't have to do it every week.
Right.
But even doing it more often than before, twice a month or sometimes 3 times a month, depending how the Sundays felt, that was hard.
And as a member of the congregation, it blows me away that you even say that, because you're so smooth. You do such a great job up there. But anyway, go ahead.
That's what you call fake it till you make it.
I guess, but you did really good then, because
I'll pay you later. Thanks. Yeah. I mean, it's something that I've been able to work on and kind of hone the skills like anything else through practice and trial and error. But at the beginning, it was taking me, I was talking to my brother David, it would take me sometimes like 15, 20 hours, like 20 hours to get ready for a 30-minute presentation. It's until you get used to doing it, and obviously until you spend more time in the Word of God and also everything that goes with that, you got to do so much prep work every time, or you feel like you do. And so that's something that I really was stressed out about, and it's good that I wasn't working full-time at the beginning of this, because that would have been even harder.
Oh, yeah.
Now I work full-time, and I pastor the church. I'm co-vocational, but I figured out a little bit more. Now I can do 30 minutes in about 5 or 6 hours of study, which is manageable in a week. But, that stress that I had, I think stress is like a rubber band. So for a rubber band to operate the way it's supposed to, it's got to stretch, right? If it's going to hold that big stack of papers together, that rubber band actually has to stretch beyond its natural state to go over it and then to do its job. And that's what I felt like looking back. I was that rubber band that I had to be stretched.
Right.
And as hard as it was, as uncomfortable as it was, you and the rest of the congregation have been very patient with me, even to not bring it up. I mean, I messed up. I've lost my train of thought. I've had good Sundays and not so good Sundays. It all goes with it,
Sure.
But to have that stress kind of pull out until it got to a place where I feel like now it's kind of just held me together.
Yeah.
And it's helped me to, I feel, get a lot more comfortable regularly public speaking. Like, I'm okay with public speaking sometimes, but now it's like every week,
And a lot of times with that kind of stuff too, you're your own worst critic, right? You know what you're trying to say, you know what
That's
you want
fair.
to say, and people sitting out there have no idea. And as far as where we're sitting, it comes out like you're not even making any mistakes. Nobody knows. So that's a good thing, I guess, right?
Yeah, so that's kind of like just a little story for me, kind of an intro story about something that was stressful, but it challenged me to get better. It didn't distress me to where I couldn't sleep, my blood pressure went through the roof, things like that. It was the kind of stress that just kind of further propelled me. So, I know you got something to say about stress.
Well, my eustress story is a little bit heavy. In 2002, my wife and I found out we were pregnant. We went to our first ultrasound appointment, and the nurse was taking the measurements. And, it was our third child, so we've been through the process before. We
Yeah.
kind of know how that all looks.
Sure.
So when she's measuring the bones, and then she'd go back and measure the bones again, and then she'd go back and measure the bones again, we're like, okay, something's not right.
Yeah.
And being that she's just the nurse, she can't tell us anything, so I had to wait for the doctor to come in, and she was saying that the long bones were measuring short. The baby was probably going to have dwarfism. So the wife and I went walking around Berkeley, California, just trying to fathom what that would look like for us. And then the next appointment, the news got a little bit worse. Every appointment, it was just worse news and worse news. And of course, the stress level when you get in those bad reports that, okay, she's got a chromosomal anomaly, probably not going to live. Took us from being victims and saying, why, God, why, to, all right, what are we doing? Going from why to what? Wow. What's the bigger picture here? What are we doing with this? And please, God, don't give us this weight for no reason whatsoever. Had a great hospital staff when the time came. They put a rainbow paper on the door so nobody would bother us. Had the baby. She stayed with us until she passed. But what it really taught me was that, you really have to be careful when you say, God, your will be done. We didn't sit and beg God to heal her and make everything right. But we also didn't think that we were in a position to have an abortion. It wasn't our call. But it was your will be done. And sometimes that is not your outcome. And that really built my relationship with God to a point that I trusted him. Now, a year later, a lady who went to our church. Now, our church was a small church. We were doing our services in a pizza parlor. Every week, I would go and tell where we were at as far as the story goes with, the pregnancy and everything like that. So everybody went through it with us. It was very, very much a God moment for everybody to go through it with us. They all supported us tremendously. And about a year later, one of the ladies in the congregation had a friend who was going through the same thing, and it allowed us to tell our story to her and how we dealt with it and how we trusted God to do whatever he was going to do. We never heard back from them as to what happened, but it was the fact that we had the opportunity to share our story with somebody who was going through the same thing, and I think that's part of the Eustress, right? It put me back in a place where I could have been like, oh, I'm a poor victim, poor me, but I got to share my story in a more positive way.
Yeah.
So...
Wow, it's amazing. So then let me ask you, as far as you and Lori go, during that whole process, I'm going to assume you had some ups and downs, because I'm going to assume that might have been the case, or no?
Actually, because we really leaned in on God for it, I know a lot of times this kind of situation will tear couples in half because somebody has to feel like somebody's to blame. And I don't think we blamed either one of us, because honestly, it was a 1 in 4 chance it would happen. We both carry a gene. It has to both be donated at the same time for it to even take place. So if it doesn't, nothing happens either way. So there's no way either one of us could be like, oh, it was your fault or it was my fault. So it actually brought us together. It brought our congregation together. It was just amazing how God used that tragedy really to glorify his kingdom.
Yeah, and that's kind of the difference between eustress and distress. So eustress is just, I think stress is there.
Right.
And the way it becomes eustress is how we handle it and how we allow it to, whether or not we allow it to help us to grow. And in your case, you're saying that it helped you and Lori to grow closer together. And perhaps even a greater testimony also is just your church community or your church family. You guys grew together as well.
Right. It also grew my faith. I mean, I had to believe that God was doing what God was going to do. And it wasn't just a fluke, accident that had happened. There was a reason behind it.
Yeah.
You can't get to heaven without coming through earth. So maybe we were picked because we could handle it.
Yeah, it's interesting. Last Friday, I shared at a gathering, a prayer service for someone who is battling cancer. And so I had about 10 minutes to share 3 hours worth of stuff. The person who's battling cancer is a good friend of mine. We're very close, a believer, has a lot of faith in God and what he's doing and what he can do. And then at the same time, there's about 100 people who came. So the preacher in me wanted to go out, right? But I had 10 minutes. And for some reason, in the 10 minutes I prepared, it was important to me to make sure and add that when Adam sinned and brought sin into the world, everything changed.
Right.
Because the heart of God is to walk with us. The heart of God is to be in relationship. The heart of God was for us to live with him in the garden, right? That was his heart. And because of sin, now we have this broken, messed up world because of sin. Now we have sickness and this and that. Because of sin, we have situations that, like you guys went through. doesn't mean that you sinned to cause it. It just means
Correct.
we live in a broken world
Absolutely.
that's surrounded by heartache and genetics mutations and things like you talked about. And, it was just so deeply impressed on me to point that out, because that's always kind of the question I think people go to is, why did God allow this to happen?
Right.
And, I think God gave the choice to Adam and Eve the same he gives the choice to you and I. And there are things that we can control, in our grasp. And there are lots of things that we can't control.
And there are so many things that you'll never know why until you get to heaven and can ask the questions. You know what I mean? And you just have to have the faith that it's what God's will is playing out in your life.
Yeah, and I think it's that trusting God that somehow, you and Lori were able to figure out at the right time. That makes a huge difference. But, as you're sharing here, what I'm thinking of right now is all the people in my life I know who never talk about hardships they're going through. Like you guys had the courage and I guess the intelligence to know you should share it with your church family, your community, so you can walk through it together. But now I don't see it as much. I see a lot more people kind of fragmented and separating areas of their life. And I could be someone I see every day for 3 months and have no idea that they've been battling cancer and doing chemotherapy or whatever it is, because they just don't share. So I guess getting to the question, why do you think that is that we don't, as a society, we don't necessarily share about everything that we used to?
Maybe it's because we are worried about what other people will think about us if we share their stories like that. I don't know. Because I'm a person, I will share my tragic stories with you if you want to sit and listen to it, because there's value in it for me.
Yeah.
I'm not scared to talk about where I've come from. So I think a lot of people may have a little fear as to where they came from because it's not a great story all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, but just having the courage to say it out loud, I think, has power.
There's a lot of freedom in that for sure.
Yeah, and maybe the difference in situations sometimes is whether or not we're willing to face it with others, or if we're trying to just kind of hide it and hope no one sees it. Because how can you grow if you're so busy just trying to hide something so nobody will ever see it?
What I can tell you is my wife and I would probably have been divorced. We would probably have been completely different people if we wouldn't have had the church supporting us and going through it with us.
Wow.
And if I wouldn't have told my story to anybody.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? If I would have just kept it myself, we probably wouldn't have made it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of power in sharing your story so other people can actually, other people have great ideas, have great insight that if you don't talk about it, you'll never be able to hear it. So.
Yeah. And to your point, other people have been through it. Like what you were saying, that you were able to now go and give counsel or advice or whatever, share your story with someone else who's going through it. And like you said, our responsibility is to scatter the seed.
Right.
We can't always know if it's going into fertile ground or onto the hard rock or whatnot. And that's what you did. And you mentioned you didn't really hear what happened, but that's okay. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't share our story.
That's not our job, is to know what happens, right? Our job is to, if God says, share your story, you share your story, and you may never have the knowledge of what happens in the end.
Yeah.
It's just the way it goes.
Well, I love it. I feel like we could keep talking about this, but true to form, we're getting towards the end of our time here. And so I guess, before I read the scripture verses for today, just in talking about Eustress and what drives us and what can help us to grow, do you have any closing thoughts on that before we get to the verses?
Well, just doing this was Eustress for me, because when you asked me to do it, I was like, yeah, because I was a buddy of mine, we're talking about doing a podcast. I'm like, yeah, let's do it. And then the first day we were supposed to record, the enemies in my ear going, you're not a pastor. You have nothing to say. There's nothing that you have that's going to be valuable. And I was almost made a phone call to you and said, something's going on. I can't make it. But I showed up, and here we are, and to the glory of God, he's using it to his benefit. So.
Yeah, and rocking it, and to what you shared, people around the world are seeing it. I know for me, I know people in the Philippines, friends of mine, and people they'll be writing me, they'll have it up on their church screens, playing the podcast, and glory to God that he's doing that.
And my former pastor, Lori Dickerson, I hope you're listening, runs a orphanage in Uganda. She's on a mission over there, so God bless you for what you're doing. Keep it up.
Now imagine if you had called and canceled, and then I'm just saying you probably would have had guilt and a feeling of failure, and so the stress of it. I guess my point is, could have easily gone into distress. Could have easily gone into not sleeping well at night, feeling guilt and shame and stuff. But because you're able to face it and have the courage to do it, it turned into something that growth. And now, you're just as comfortable as anyone else, I think.
I hope so.
So something we want to read is Psalms 94, verse 18 through 19. Psalms chapter 94, verses 18 through 19 says, I cried out, I am slipping. But your unfailing love, O Lord, supported me. When doubts filled my mind, your comfort gave me renewed hope and cheer. Talk about lining up with pretty much exactly what you talked about today. It says, when doubts filled my mind, your comfort gave me renewed hope and cheer. And for our listeners today, that's what we hope for you, that you would have renewed hope and cheer, that wherever there's areas of desperation in your life, wherever there's areas where you feel like you just can't do it, or you're on the brink of failure and, you kind of want to implode, I guess our advice to you today is pray, meditate, and find someone you trust to share it with. Find someone you trust who will help to carry the load, because when we confess things to each other, when we're able to just talk about what we're going through, when we're able to verbalize and have kind of reflective listening and conversation, there's a lot of freedom that comes. I think the enemy wants to bind us into loneliness, to thinking nobody cares about us. And, when we get into that phase, it's distress for sure. But, hey, that's it for this episode. Next, we're going to release one on distress, which is the negative kind of stress, which has other implications. But, hey, we love you guys. Thanks for checking in. And always stay alive in Him.
We'll see you next time.